Welcome to this explainer. Have you ever wondered if the bond between a mother and child goes way beyond just, everyday emotions or basic biology? Well, today we are diving into a truly incredible interdisciplinary paper that integrates quantum biophysics and system sociology to completely redefine how we understand adoption. We're going to explore this through the lens of the resonance of displacement, which is a framework that essentially provides a unified field theory of the adoptive experience. It's a totally new way of looking at human connection, exploring how a foundational wound actually intersects with neurobiology, market commodification, and the intense societal pressures placed on the adoption triad. Okay, so here's our roadmap for today. We're going to cover 1. The quantum maternal bond, 2. Structural resonance collapse, 3. The HPA radioscanner, 4. Trapped in the fog, 5. Societal display mandates, and finally 6. Markets and social lasers. Let's jump right into section 1, the quantum maternal bond, redefining the architecture of human connection. We are starting off by examining the literal invisible physics of the mother-infant connection during gestation. To really wrap our heads around human connection, we first have to ask a massive foundational question from general resonance theory, the combination problem. Basically, how do separate physical entities like individual cells or neurons actually sync up to form a unified, higher-level macro consciousness? Think about that for a second. This paper explains that physical matter naturally vibrates, and when entities vibrate in close physical proximity, like a fetus growing within a mother, they actually begin to achieve a shared resonance. So the answer to how this synchronization happens lies in something called Photon Sheet Theory. And this is fascinating. This concept posits that a mother and fetus don't just share a standard biochemical connection. They literally operate as a single macro-conscious entity joined by a continuous bioenergetic field. They are physically coupled by a highly coherent field of light and energy that acts as the foundational scaffold for the infant's developing nervous system. And we have the hard data backing this up. This isn't just a poetic metaphor. Human cells emit literal light, these ultra-weak photon emissions known as biophotons. And this process starts at 260 nanometers. These wavelengths actually extend all the way up to 800 nanometers. So in the womb, these biophotons are forming a literal, instantaneous communication channel between mother and child, regulating metabolism, development, and hundreds of thousands of chemical reactions every single second. Okay, this gets even more mind-bending when you look at the biophotonic architecture making it all possible. Our DNA actually acts as a highly dense exciplex laser. It compacts these photons to form a room-temperature Bose-Einstein condensate. To put that in plain terms, our nervous system is transmitting liquid light data through biological fiber optic cables, like our myelin sheaths. This creates the exact baseline resonant frequency the infant needs to survive. Moving right along to section 2, structural resonance collapse, the physics of the foundational cut. Let's see what happens when that incredible biophysical connection is suddenly severed.
The absolutely crucial point here is that early maternal separation, what's often called the primal wound of adoption, isn't just a psychological or emotional loss. According to this framework, it is a catastrophic structural resonance collapse. The very instant that photon sheet is cut, the infant is dropped into a complete biophysical vacuum. The synapses that were busy wiring themselves within a highly regulated field of safety are suddenly hit with profound, destructive interference. Section 3. The HPA radioscanner. Now we are going to translate that quantum language into the hard clinical reality of human neurobiology, specifically looking at the stress response. When this structural rupture occurs, the infant experiences an overwhelming surge in allostatic load. This triggers a very precise, entirely dysregulated biological chain reaction in the HPA axis, which is the body's main stress management system. First, the hypothalamus synthesizes CRH. Second, that signals the pituitary gland to release ACTH. And third, that tells the adrenal cortex to just dump cortisol into the system. Without the biological mother there to buffer this response, the hardware basically burns out. It leads to long-term glucocorticoid resistance and systemic inflammation. And this leads to a concept I find absolutely fascinating. Think of the hyperactivated HPA axis as a broken radio scanner. Deprived of its original external oscillator, the mother, the system continuously sweeps the energetic static, frantically trying to lock onto a baseline resonant frequency that has just vanished. So the chronic anxiety and hypervigilance often seen in adoptees? It isn't just behavioral, it's the biological hardware stuck in a permanent scanning loop. Section 4. Trapped in the fog. adopting to a severed energetic spectrum. Let's move up to the psychological level and examine how the developing adoptee attempts to survive this permanent, destructive interference.
So the mind has to adapt, right? It uses what the paper calls resonant cognitive architecture. To secure attachment in a totally new, unfamiliar ecology, the adoptee constructs a compliant, false self. They do this by internalizing societal mean forms, like the unspoken mandate that they must be eternally grateful. This pushes the adoptee into the fog, which is essentially an internal algorithmic dampening field used to suppress the agonizing high-frequency noise of their primal wound. And just pausing to consider the sheer complexity here, this disorientation is magnified drastically in transracial adoptions. The child is completely deprived of reflective racial waveguides, leaving them navigating development like an explorer without a map.
Which brings us to Section 5, Societal Display Mandates, applying structural empathy to the adoption triad. To maintain strict impartiality, we have to recognize that adoptive parents are also victims of severe systemic forces. Western society overwhelmingly prioritizes biological connections. Because of this, adoptive families carry a really unique burden. While they bond through doing family, the organic day-to-day practices like sharing meals, they are forced by society into constantly displaying family. They have to continuously perform their kinship to external audiences just to prove their social legitimacy. This puts massive pressure on the adoptive parents to enforce a happy family narrative, and unfortunately, that leaves them structurally unequipped to handle the adoptee's trauma. When you look at the triad as a whole, it reveals this tragic multi-reality trap. Every single member of the adoption triad is structurally forced into defensive fog by relentless societal pressures. The adoptee internalizes a false self to survive destructive interference. The birth mother is silenced by the heavy stigma of disenfranchised grief, and the adoptive parents overdisplay the happy family to combat a lack of biological resonance. It's an entire shared ecosystem of systemic dissonance. Finally, Section 6, Markets and Social Lasers. Let's zoom all the way out to the macro level and examine the massive economic structures orchestrating these field ruptures in the first place. In the domestic and international markets, infants are technically treated as diverted commodities. Agency fees can soar up to $70,000. Because placing a price tag on human life creates an obviously complex moral dynamic, the industry requires facilitators to perform exhausting moral maintenance, carefully framing the transaction to protect adoptive parents from the reality of a commodified system. To wrap our heads around this mathematically, the paper uses social laser theory. Imagine the adoption industry as a massive optical cavity. It continuously pumps society with rescue narratives and moral imperatives, which are called infants. This pumping amplifies latent desire among prospective parents until it induces a highly coherent, laser-like market demand for children that far outstrips the actual supply of orphans. The market is quite literally engineering artificial couplings over natural biological resonance. But here's the thing. Biology always seeks its original resonance. When separated biological relatives reunite in adulthood, they often experience a massive flood of constructive interference. This can trigger genetic sexual attraction, or GSA. When viewed strictly through biophysics, this is a highly misunderstood, delayed biological imperative. It's simply the lower brain suddenly locating the precise biophotonic frequency it's been frantically scanning for since infancy, resulting in an overwhelming urge for somatic merging that gets misinterpreted as romantic desire. So, how on earth do we begin addressing this massive systemic divergence? The paper argues we literally have to shift our sociolinguistics. Right now, the industry relies on positive adoption language, or PAL, which acts as a low-pass filter, filtering out the messy, high-frequency realities of trauma. We must transition to honest adoption language, or HAL. By using terms that validate the loss, like saying surrendered rather than placed, we tune the frequency to restore vital signal integrity and historical accuracy for the entire triad. By understanding the primal wound, not just as a metaphor, but as a real, measurable physical rupture of a continuous light field, we can completely shift our paradigm of care. I'll leave you with this final thought for our explainer today. How can we dismantle these systemic display mandates, tune out the artificial market lasers, and finally redesign our society to prioritize profound human resonance over commodification? Thank you so much for exploring this fascinating framework with me.